In this video, I want to answer a question that I get from time to time about Ukrainian losses in the war, and that question is whether it is possible for Ukraine to continue the war in the long run with the losses that they're taking. So let's talk about it. This is going to be a fairly short video. I've been busy with other projects that I am excited about, but it has meant that I haven't had much time for making YouTube videos. And frankly, that is still the case, but I wanted to get a video out so that I don't lose momentum entirely. So I thought I would answer a question that I got on Mastodon, which was about the Ukrainian losses in the war. And I've been getting this question quite a bit, so I actually have a kind of standard response, but I don't think I've shared it on YouTube. But before we get to the answer, let's just quickly examine the question. We've had quite a few numbers about the Russian casualties in the war. I've made a video about that before in the spring, I think. Back then, I used the numbers from Mediazona as the low bar and the number from the Ukrainian General Staff as the high bar. So if we take those same numbers today, then Mediazona's number is about 32,000 killed Russian soldiers, and the Ukrainian number is almost 275,000 casualties. So casualties is a term that covers both dead and wounded. So the real number is somewhere in between those two numbers. But Mediazona has since then also published some other numbers that they found using a different method, where they found that in May, the real number of dead Russian soldiers was at least 47,000. So I think it's fair to set sort of now here in September to set the low bar at least 60,000 dead Russian soldiers. Back in August, some numbers came out with estimates from the US government, and their estimate was about 120,000 Russian deaths and about 180,000 wounded. So that was a total number of about 300,000 dead or wounded Russian soldiers. So interestingly, that is actually a bigger number than the number the Ukrainians promote. Now, I just want to stress that there is no reason to actually believing that the U.S. has better numbers than everybody else. They're just estimating like everyone else is doing. But what is interesting about the American numbers is that they also had numbers for estimated Ukrainian losses. And that is something that we don't get from the Ukrainians and that we also don't get from other sources like Mediazona. So the American estimate was that Ukraine has had about 70,000 killed and between 100 and 120,000 wounded. So that is less than on the Russian side, but it's still an enormous number. And that leads to some people asking whether it is sustainable for Ukraine with these losses, because Ukraine is a smaller country than Russia. So even if Russia has bigger losses, then relatively speaking, it could be worse for Ukraine. And I think some of this concern in the West also has sort of been exacerbated by the growing number of stories about draft dodgers in Ukraine and these sorts of things. There have been different examples of how Ukraine has tried to solve problems related to corruption, where Ukrainian men will pay to get some kind of medical record that shows that they can't do military service and these sorts of things. So I think this has actually come as a surprise for some people in the West that there are people in Ukraine that don't want to fight and that they are being drafted against their will. But that is how war works. Like we're no longer in those days where there were lines of volunteers and there was a waiting list to get into the armed forces of Ukraine. So I think that is the context in which we should understand this question about the sustainability of Ukrainian losses. So here's my answer. Both Russia and Ukraine are big countries. Russia has about 140 million people, and Ukraine has about 40 million. So that is a big difference. But these are both big countries. Like I'm not aware of any sort of particular rule of thumb about how big part of an average population that is fit for military service. But we can say that about half the Ukrainians are men, so that is about 20 million men. And then there's also some women in the military. So I think that if we say that at least 1 in 4 Ukrainians will be fit for military service, then I think that is a conservative estimate. So that is at least 10 million potential soldiers that Ukraine can recruit from. So if we hold that up against the current Ukrainian casualty rate, then it is absolutely sustainable. Like Ukraine can continue this for decades. So my point is that neither Ukraine nor Russia is going to run out of potential soldiers. Like, both countries have plenty of people that can put on a uniform. And the current losses are sustainable if they are willing to sustain them. And that means that this war is first and foremost a contest of wills. Are they ready to take those losses and to endure that suffering? And frankly, I think it looks like Ukraine is more willing to do that than Russia. Because from a military point of view, Ukraine is doing the right thing by having an ongoing draft where they replace their losses, and they also manage to grow the military. And Russia, on the other hand, is still not having a systematic approach to replacing their losses. Like, they should have had another round of mobilization like 6 to 8 months ago, but they didn't do that because Putin was afraid of a public backlash. So this indicates to me that Ukraine has an advantage when it comes to the will to sustain the losses. Now, that does not mean that the casualties are not a problem for Ukraine. Of course they are. But from a military point of view, it is mostly a training problem. Like, Ukraine is losing experienced and skilled soldiers on the front lines, and they are replacing them with inexperienced soldiers that didn't volunteer to be there on the front line. So this is a quality problem. And that means that Ukraine will continue to need support for training because there is a constant flow of new recruits. So the casualties mean that Ukraine has a massive challenge with training and education, but they're not going to run out of soldiers. Okay, that was my response to the question about Ukrainian casualty numbers. I'm going to end it here. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next time.